So maybe we don't really meet the people of Shambhala until we kind of get into the fourth dimension, which is potentially going to happen real soon as we're coming out of and getting into Dwarpa Yuga now, that we meet them when our dimensions align, kind of. I don't know. But Robert Thurman, who's does Tibetan Buddhist studies at, I think, Harvard University or whatever, you've probably heard of him. He's Uma Thurman's father. Everybody knows that. But he's really well connected with Tibetan. So when he says something, I kind of tend to listen to that he might have some of this esoteric information that I've always been dying to get my hands on, but they're very secretive about. He says the population of Shambhala is 300 million people.
Wow.
So, that's a lot of people. So the earth really would have to be hollow. That's just not, you can't get 300 million people in caverns, I don't think. And the Panchen Lama is said to be the surface king of Shambhala. And the last Panchen Lama was taken as a child by the Chinese, and they haven't seen him since. But the Panchen Lama is a pretty important person to the people of Shambhala. And there's a lot of disinformation out there about the Tibetan Sangha too. Like, you've probably read the stuff where they say the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, is a CIA agent, and he colluded with the Nazis. He was 6 years old when the Nazis existed and the Nazi parties existed. And the reason the Nazis sent some of their agents to Tibet is they knew the esoteric, these occultists. There's some good esoteric people, but there's also the occult side of it. They knew that they had the access to Shambhala. That who else? If I was an in-earth higher advanced, I'd probably connect with Tibetan Sangha first too. Those are some of the best souls on the planet, right? And so there's all this disinformation about the Dalai Lama now. The best one I ever read was that he colluded with the Nazis, because after the end of World War II, they found all these Tibetan-looking people fighting with the Nazis, and they were actually Kalmaks, which are from Russia, because Stalin was purging all of the ethnic groups, and they were killing all these Kalmaks. So when the Nazis started fighting against the Russians, they ran out and said, "We'll fight with you because we hate the Russians." And that's who these people really were. But of course, the disinformation agents, they only read off the internet and report on this stuff. They don't actually do any real research. And he was 6 years old. He was not, and when Tibet was taken over and they went into India, Indians were very grateful to take all those Tibetans. Maybe the CIA was talking to them, because communist red China, and maybe the money did flow there, but that money would have went to poor people. That he wasn't buying gold Rolex watches and living in mansions or something. He was teaching the Dharma, and he was caring about his people. And so I really don't like disinformation about the holy brothers and sisters of Tibet, because it's all it is disinformation. And it's not even logical or verifiable stuff. It's just fluff off the internet. And so the Tibetan Sangha has a very close connection with Shambhala because of who they are as spiritual people. That's a fact. And I won't mention names of who report that stuff on the internet, but so there's kind of a two parts to Shambhala, though. There's this northern part of Shambhala, which is the home of the Kalki king, or Maitreya. And northern Shambhala is said to where the warriors of northern Shambhala come from. And these are the 144,000 that ride out behind the Maitreya at the end of the age to defeat the evil forces. And I don't know if they ride out of Mount Kailash or where they come out. There's probably many places they can come out, but that's the prophecy of all these different sects about this guy on the white horse with 144,000. It's tied to this place. It's the exact same thing you see in Revelations. You see the Kalki avatar, these are Kalki kings, Kalki avatar. It's all connected. We just get it all mixed up with our names, the real Vedic word for Shambhala is like Sambhako, and then we call it Shambhala and Shangri-La. It's all the same place, and I think this place really exists. I really do. It's definitely a place. And another thing that apparently resides there is this Chiamanti stone. Have you heard about the Chiamanti stone?
No, I haven't.
The Chiamanti stone, Nicholas Roerich and his wife Helena Roerich, they apparently he was a big world peace advocate, a very famous Russian artist. They were kind of like theosophists. Theosophy got invaded by the Cabal as well. Shortly after Madame Blavatsky, it just started going downhill. And so if you want to read about Maitreya Buddha and you go on the internet, you're going to hit stuff by Share International and all these different sites. And you want to go to the Tibetan and the real stuff. All this esoteric stuff is just pie in the sky stuff. It's not the original stuff. But this Chiamati stone apparently was a gift from Orion, came from Orion, but they called it a prime A substance. So some people say it came from Sirius A, the star on Sirius A, and it's some kind of special stone. And it says that whoever holds this stone holds the destiny of Earth. So this is why the Nazis were sending agents to Tibet. They wanted to get into Shambhala, and they wanted two things, I think. I think they wanted the Chiamati stone, and I think they wanted the Spear of Salvation. Both of those objects are said to reside in Shambhala.
Wow.
They're very important. Now, Nicholas Roerich, apparently there's a lot of conjecture, but they said that he had a piece of the Chiamati stone, and he was taking it back to Shambhala. Him and his wife spent like decades going all through Tibet and Mongolia. And she describes it to a T what it looked like. It was like you could hold it in your hand. So I think they just had a piece of it, and they were taking it back to Shambhala. And Solomon apparently had a piece of it, and he cut and made a ring, which he wasn't supposed to do. But I think that's how Solomon subdued the dark forces, the Archnons, is he had this ring and this primate substance. It's a powerful thing. It's like a star condensed. It's not super heavy. Helena Roerich talked about holding it, so it's not super heavy. The only thing I read about it is you got to be tranquil when you're around it, and you got to slowly be around it. And a lot of people think it's what was really in the Ark of the Covenant on Tepe was the Chiamati stone. That's kind of when the world government sort of forms. That's where it was at one time. And it's this last Kalki king, Ruda Chakran, that comes out at the end of the age. Ruda Chakran is the Kalki Maitreya. He's the guy in the white horse in Revelation, and nobody knows his name. I really believe it's all the same thing. I think it's just we're all drawing down this information, and it's in different beliefs, but it's the same thing.
Wow.
So now we're going to talk about Kalachakra Astronomy. They carefully track these north and southern nodal points of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So, when the moon or the sun goes across the sky in the daytime,
mm-hmm.
you see that arc that it follows?
Mm-hmm.
That's the ecliptic, right? Well, the moon comes along the same path, but it's slightly different. So when the moon and the sun, those two paths are right above each other, that's the nodal point that they're tracking. That's what Goblekli Tepe, Stonehenge, all these Stonehenge devices, Nazca Lines, everything was used to track these nodal points. Because if you got to prepare a couple, maybe 2 weeks in advance before a lunar eclipse occurs. So you could say, well, why don't we just go out and do our practices every full moon? It's only once a month, so we only have to do that 12 times a year, right? Well, you only get a lunar eclipse every 18, 24 months. So you would be doing a lot of practices, and sometimes maybe days in advance to kind of tire the mind out, get to that point of no mind, get your breathing right, everything. It would take time. So they would need to know in advance when these eclipses were coming. So they built these arithmetic ground calculators. That's what all these devices are, to use to predict the eclipses purely for spiritual purposes, nothing else. And I believe some of this is tied to ancient alien races, potentially, that were these blue-skinned people who were teaching us this. And they wanted us to know this so that when we came out of this dark age, that we could learn this again, remember it again, and move on in our spiritual evolution. But these bands in the sky, so when it's on the top, they called that Ra'u. in Vedic astronomy, and they called it Ketu on the bottom. So when it's at the top, a solar eclipse is going to come, and if it goes through the band on the bottom, the sun, and the lower nodal point, it's a lunar eclipse is going to, or a lunar eclipse is going to occur. So they were tracking these bands. All these ancient astronomers were tracking these nodal points, and it was for a reason. And you know how I said sometimes things get lost? If you look at Vedic astronomy now, they call Rahu and Ketu planets. So they actually believe when an eclipse occurs, a separate dark planet comes in and hides the moon. And it's an ancient teaching that got mixed up, and Rahu and Ketu are not separate planets. They're spiritual nodal points above and below the moon that ancients knew were very important for spiritual reasons. That's what they track these for. And the interesting thing, if you look at this, they're called Rahu and Ketu in Vedic astrology. In the Kalachakra Tantra, they're called Rahu and Kalagni, and pretty close, right? Because if Buddha actually did see a lunar eclipse and realized there was a blood moon that night, which he did, I'm certain of it, he would have just had to go back into Vedic astronomy, and this was all there already. He would have known about that, and I think that's where the mathematics came into play, why the Kalachakra actually has the mathematics for predicting eclipses thousands of years in advance, Alfred. That's in the Kalachakra Tantra. This is 2,500 years ago. So they were tracking these bands, and so the ancients knew that these blood moons were, they tracked them for spiritual purposes. And like I said, we had these tetrads in 2014, 15, and we got triads coming up in 2018 and 19. These are markers, but they're markers that, you know, it's the golden age. We're in the stream now. It's time for people to wake up, and this will help you. I actually believe that, you know, maybe even through this interview series, we'll start seeing people come forward and saying that their shift of consciousness happened during these times. That's going to happen. That will happen in the future, and there's going to be more and more people coming forward and saying, "Holy smokes, this is right. This is what happened to me." And they were really Passover and Tabernacle days for the whole world. These were Enlightenment days, not doom days. And you know, we got this triad coming up. I hope we don't jump on the doom bandwagon for that too, and really see what they're there for. They were there for spiritual purposes. And the Hebrews have this term called Mazaroth, which means the signs are in the heavens. So we get out of the Kali Yuga, 2012 happens. We get out of the stanzas period. We're now directly into Dwarpa Yuga. Virtue's at 50% now. Bang, we get a tetrad. And then bang, we get a triad. And we also get this Virgo, the moon going through Virgo and being birthed in September. All of this stuff, these are important alignments. They're important markers. And society, or especially a lot of the Christians and stuff, they're looking the wrong ways. They're seeing this all the wrong way. And I think it's by design. I think that whole infiltration of Rome into his teachings have really, you know, it's messed it up a lot. And hopefully some of them can watch this and learn something. Maybe not. It might be just too much for them, right? So these blood moons are all in Jewish high holidays for a reason. And that's why it's there. They wanted people to do spiritual practices during full moons. And that's why it's in Kriya Yoga. I know the Tibetans know about this. I've often seen Tibetans telling their students to go practice during eclipses. They know this stuff. They just don't openly teach it yet, because you really, maybe they don't know where we're at in the Yuga cycle, and they still think we have 427,000 years of the Dark Age, because, you know, I don't think that's the case though. Now, Vedic astrology does the same thing. Now, it's important to understand this. Now, if you understand this band that goes around our planet, right? And in astrology, in Western astrology, we divide into 12 segments. Well, Vedic astrology does the same thing. They got it in 12 parts. Theirs is a bit more accurate though, because they see the stars as fixed against the planets. So theirs is incorporating the precession of the equinox. Ours isn't. So ours has to, Western astronomy can actually get out of whack a little bit. It takes 1,000 years to happen, but The Vedic astronomy is probably a lot more accurate in that way. And each one of these signs called a rasi, the measurement differs. But they do measure this precession, but they also they break it down into 27 segments as two. And they call this the lunar zodiac. So they're watching the lunar stuff very carefully in Vedic astronomy. And there's this missing 28th, because the lunar day, there's 28 days to a lunar month, right? So this 28th missing one is called a nakshatra. And it's king amongst all of them. And it's a hidden one. And they were also tracking these nodal points. And in Vedic astronomy, where they talk about Ketu and Rahu actually being planets, they're really talking about these spiritual energy points above and below the moon, that this is actually a very important spiritual time when these eclipses occur. And they were tracking this, Alfred. This is old. This is some of this stuff's in the Rig Veda. This is old stuff. And then if you look at Goblekli, which is this ground-based calculator used for predicting eclipses, that's over 12,000 years old, which really implies that they knew this back in the time of Atlantis. This goes back a long ways. We knew this in our history. We lost it all, but we knew it once before. It was known before. So this Shambhala prophecy and this Hindu prophecy, very, very similar. The only interesting thing is that the Kalachakra Tantra does have this aggressive component to it, where this Rudra Chakran is seen as a wrathful wheel turner. So a Buddha is a wheel turner, but this guy's wrathful. He is just like the guy in Revelations, where his eyes are on fire and he's on a white horse and he's noble and true and he makes war against all the nations. It's the same guy. This is the same person. These two prophecies are the same person. And he's called the wrathful wheel turner, because I think probably sometimes evil has to be met head on, and that's what this is about. Is at some point there's going to be a kind of a clash between the light and the dark. Maybe it's just a spiritual clash. Maybe when we all become enlightened, we just kind of dissolve it. We don't have to fulfill prophecies. We can rise above that. That's what I'm trying to say in this whole presentation. We can change our destiny. We don't have to follow a prophecy. We can change it. We have that potential, and we're in the right zone to change it now. And each one of these Kalki kings rules for 100 years. So Buddha was 2,500 years ago, so we're roughly getting close to the 25th Kalki king. It's coming up, right? And this is the one who's returns to the surface with the 144,000 guys on horses. People wonder why would they be on horses, but maybe some of the sun changes causes solar flares and we don't have power anymore and stuff, and that's the way things are in our near future or something. I don't know, but it's the exact same story as the guy on the white horse in Revelations. It's in all these prophecies, and it's kind of funny when you start researching this. So down below here, this is a typical picture of the Kalki avatar, who is Krishna or Vishnu, comes at the end of the age. And you got the Christian guy, the guy on the rider on the white horse that nobody knows his name. I've always had a problem with that, because we know Jesus' name. So who's the guy on the white horse? And I think the Romans are trying to turn this upside down. So it's a very bad thing to blaspheme the last guy who comes. That's the you can blaspheme the Son, the Father, but the Holy Ghost you're not supposed to. And I think this guy's potentially like the Holy Ghost. So I think at the end of the age that we get to a point where just the crap's not tolerated anymore. You're either in the light or you're not. You know what I mean? I think we do reach a point like that. I don't know for sure, but I think we might. It's just interesting that it's all in these different theories, right? So then I thought about when this was all happening and these tetrads coming. If you think about a higher race, that's like these blue skin beings, for example, which Krishna or Rama might have been linked to. they're trying to help us evolve spiritually. They're not going to come in and give us a bunch of cash, give us twin flames and all this other stuff. Everything they do was for spiritual purposes in the past. And I think everything they might be doing now would be for spiritual purposes. Now, you interviewed a really nice lady. I keep forgetting her name. She does crop circle research.
Yeah, Patty Greer.
Yeah, Patty Greer. She was feeling that somehow this crop circle information is being suppressed, and we don't want it, for some reason, mainstream is trying to push it down. And I think it's for a reason. I think that we might really have some extraterrestrial race leaving us clues, leaving us little messages.
Yeah.
So look at some of these crop circles that appeared right around the tetrad. You see this one up here in the right corner right here?
Yeah.
You got 4 moons, 4 objects going into eclipse. You see an eclipse there, an eclipse there, an eclipse there, an eclipse there, and a cross. And I think it's talking about the tetrads coming up and the spiritual capabilities of these tetrads. They're telling us, watch out for these eclipses, these lunar eclipses. That's what this is. I might be wrong. I'm not a crop circle. I'm just a Dharma teacher. I'm not a crop circle. I'm just shooting in the wind here. Maybe some of these researchers really can pick up on this. This is the one that blew me away, though. See this one? This appeared right around the tetrad again. It's a man. He looks like a butterfly. See? What happens to a larva when it turns into a butterfly, right? There's a transformation.
Yeah.
Well, this thing is talking, see these tracking points? There's 4 tracking points of, it looks like moons coming down right here. It's talking about these nodal points that they monitor, and there's 4 tetrads coming up. And if you watch these tetrads, people on Earth, you will transform spiritually like a butterfly does. You see how this guy's got the butterfly? That's what I read in this crop circle. I could be wrong.
Right.
You know, a real crop circle researcher might come on and say, you're just stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. I just want to put that out there. Here's another cool one, because you ask about the Kundalini rising, which is the same thing as the Buddha nature rising, the serpent, the coil, the serpent uncoiling, you know, the Kundalini rising. Well, look at this one. You get sort of an eclipse happening here. It's talking about tracking the moon, these nodal points again coming through. And then you've got a serpent, picture of a serpent here. So it's talking about the Kundalini, or the uncoiling of the serpent during an eclipse. That's what I'm reading in that one. So I could be wrong too. It's just funny that this is there, right? And here's another one that you can see. It's a butterfly, and it looks like these segments look like a planet coming into position, or a moon coming into position for an eclipse. And again, the transformation back into a butterfly. So the butterfly is really talking about a spiritual transformation potentially. I don't know. I started seeing these things, and this is the first thing that came to me, because I knew all this other esoteric information. So when I saw these things, I was like, oh my God, we're being told about this even from our galactic friends. But of course, typical humans, over the head, and we miss it. And this is an interesting one too, is you see how there's a scale of balance here? And you can see how these things all drop down. It looks like 4 eclipses, and then that the God code, or the higher frequencies, is suddenly available to us during this point. The matrix is down. You know, enlightenment occurs. So there's just some really interesting crop circles that showed up right around when all of this stuff was going down. So why I'm bringing this out, and maybe Patty can look at this, is if she starts seeing things like this, but in threes, in sets of 3s, in this year and the next year, as this tetrad comes up, or triad, because there's only 3 lunar eclipses coming up. Of course, they're all on Jewish feast days and holidays, because all Hebrew holidays are on full moons. You know, the researchers or the watchers missed that part. You now know why, why this is happening. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these crop circles in the next year or 2, because I think we're going to start seeing sets of 3. Or I might be given some shills. Some of these things aren't being made by people. You can just tell. You have to be almost stupid to say that they're not, right? So the ancients knew about timing and technique. And it came from somewhere else, I think. I think some of these ancient races taught us this to even be able to monitor that 24,000 year cycle, you would have to at least go around 100,000 years, maybe to be able to see the changes, right? And then you'd have to record it all that time. We didn't do that, yet we have that information. I think it came from space, or it came from somewhere else. I'm certain of it. And that these lunar eclipses, total lunar eclipses, not penumbral, it has to be a total lunar eclipse. Has to be a total lunar eclipse. If you actually go out and watch one, you can actually feel it on the top of your head if you're spiritually inclined. You can feel like a tugging feeling. It affects magnetics of the soul. It does. It really does. It's like a cosmic zero pointer or something like that. And the ancients knew about this. So let's talk about this. So we got Stonehenge. Everybody knows about Stonehenge. And here again with Stonehenge, we got shills because they're trying to play down these sites now. This is the next big thing you see. In about 1956, some cranes went in there because Stonehenge fell over, right? It used to have stones along the top in a complete circle too, and a lot of them fell over. They went in there with some stuff in about 1956, and I think they stood up one or two more of them because it was a pretty popular tourist site, and they're trying to mop up the place. Now all the shills are on the internet because they only research as far as Google, and they're saying that Stonehenge was made in 1956. Well, it goes back thousands of years in British history. They were researching this. Some of these guys that I'm talking about are researching it way before 1956. So you're going to see a lot of shilling with these sites. We have to relook at all of these ancient sites with fresh eyes again because we got it wrong. I'm kind of being arrogant to saying that we got it wrong, but I really think we got it wrong, and I'll show you why. Because the mathematics work, and the thought process behind it works. So Gerald Hawkins discovered that Stonehenge was a giant astronomical calculator, and it could accurately predict lunar and solar eclipses. So you can actually track those nodal points above and below the moon where the sun intersects with these ground-based devices. In fact, that whole cosmology of Vedic, and where they monitor that whole band, that's what these devices were. They were using them for tracking the position of stars, but more importantly, eclipses, because it was for spiritual purposes. And you can track these nodal points. And now they found just recently around the out part of Stonehenge, they found all these holes where wooden pegs were placed. So they were going out at night using these stones to triangulate where these nodal points were at all the time. So as an eclipse was slowly coming in, you would be able to tell where it was above and below the sun. So they're basically recreating what's happening in the heavens on that ecliptic down on the ground, and these circular. That's why these are all circular rock formations, because it's as above, so below. They're tracking the celestial positions of the sun, the moon, the planets, everything. They were tracking everything on these devices because they knew that interconnection to the multiverse was real, and they knew its effects on the soul, the spirit. It's all interconnected. It really is. And and they could use shadows as these reference points. So I think that potentially even Stonehenge is not 5,000-7,000. It could be 10,000 years old. It's probably a lot older than we think. I think even the pyramids, the Great Pyramid, is potentially older than we think. We're carbon dating stuff around a lot of these sites, but may not necessarily had been the people that actually built it, right? So they were tracking Venus and other celestial bodies. But here's an important picture. This is just a random picture of Stonehenge. Now you see how these stones here, these stones that are on top here, this obviously went all the way around, right? Like the whole structure, and some of these fell down. That's what they were kind of fixing in the 1950s. But of course the shills jumped on this because they got to have their 5 minutes of fame and say that it was all just made recently. But you see, they found these wooden peg holes away out in this outer ring. You see this outer ring here? You see how you can see the shadows? You see the shadows coming off these stones? You see that, Alfred?
Right.
You could accurately predict when the longest day of the year, when the solstice was going to happen, and you could also predict where these nodal points of the moon are from these shadows. You can track this all the time. And that's what this is. This is an arithmetical ground calculator primarily used for tracking eclipses for spiritual purposes.
Right.
And it's old. And these ancient races came here and helped us build these, or we might have been so highly developed in the last golden age that we did it ourselves. We might have even been able to make Vimanas ourselves, but I just don't think so, because of just the way the history goes and the way some of this technology is understood. It has to go back longer. It has to be a more advanced race, I think, to give us some of this information.
Right.
So I drew this up. So this is Stonehenge from a higher. See how there's two rings? So you can start the northern point where the sun intersects here, Rahu. When these two intersect right here, you're going to have a solar eclipse. And when they intersect here, you're going to have a lunar eclipse. So you can triangulate these positions all the time as these things occur in advance. That's what these devices were used for. And they could also detect where the longest day of the year is, where the shortest day. And then they had this outer circle with these wooden peg holes where they were marking. So they were getting it pretty accurately. They would know within a day or two when a solar or lunar eclipse would occur, or when a total solar eclipse would occur.
Right.
They knew that. That's what these devices were for.
Right. And you said that there is a similar site in Canada.
Yeah, kind of similar. We're going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But this other one called Goblekli Tepe. Now, this is the one that really makes me believe that this teaching goes back 13,000 years ago, because they're saying that this site is 12 to 13,000 years old. They know
Right.
that, right? Now, if you look at this picture of this rock here, you see how it's all buried with these little stones?
Yeah.
This whole site was buried, completely buried. So whoever built this, they built it and then they buried it, completely intact. Now, why did they do that? And I think the reason is that this was built before the duel came in by Atlantean people, or the people of the Golden Age. There was, Australian Aborigines lived in the Golden Age, but there was a higher civilization somewhere on this planet, and they went out with Vimanas and they were teaching our ancestors these teachings, so they could in the future learn this again and enter the Golden Age as an enlightened race. See, they can't come just fly down and leave as a sutra and say, hey, read this, it's got to. We have to find it ourselves. We have to. We're not prisoners on this planet because we went through the Dark Age. We've all agreed to be here. No, this is not a prison planet. We agreed to be here. We're here as souls, and part of spiritual evolution is to learn your lessons. So coming in with a bunch of money and cash and Nesra, that's not what it's about. This is spiritual stuff, and they were doing spiritual stuff in our past, and they want us to be doing spiritual stuff right now, because that's really who we are as a race. We're spiritual beings in a physical body.
Right.
But look at this. This site's completely wrong. But you see this little notch on the top?
Yeah.
Well, there's center stones within the center of these circles of stones, and I think that the sunlight was hitting that, so it would make a little groove on the reflection of the stone that they were monitoring, so they could monitor these positions slightly different than using those pegs around Stonehenge. This was actually a better site. Look how smooth that stone is. Like they got more effort was put into making this site. And these aren't small stones. These things weigh tons, many tons. These are big, big devices. And it was buried because I think some of these sites, that one that's in South America where all those blocks are all over the place. It looks like somebody came and just shook the whole thing apart, and there's these giant stones everywhere. I think when our duel came in 13,500 years ago, it shook things up, and whoever built this buried it to protect it. I don't know for sure, but I think they buried it to protect it for future generations.
Right.
And again, it's most likely an astronomical calculator. So Göbekli Tepe is likely being misread. And I wrote this researcher too, but he died of a heart attack. And so I don't know who's main researcher on this site now. But it was carefully buried by these small stones. I believe they wanted to use it for future generations. I think these people of Atlantis went all over the world and built these sites for us, and that they were probably hoping we would figure out how they were used. So this is Göbekli Tepe. See how they're slowly unearthing it? So it's in a perfect circle, just like Stonehenge, and you get these little grooves on the top of these. This site is 13,000 years old. We knew this a long time ago, this information. Like we were spiritual beings a long time ago, and we knew this information a long time ago. And it even has star constellations engraved on these stones where they can be almost mapped with star constellations in the sky. So they were competent astronomers way back when. Now the Nazca Lines in Peru are a little bit different. Göbekli Tepe was 12,000 years ago. Stonehenge is anywhere 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago. Nazca Lines are only about 2,000 years. So as we go longer in time and we get closer to the Dark Age, the giants sort of disappear off the face of the earth. There's no more writings about giants, and we go into the Dark Age. Well, the Nazca Lines, guess what? Another researcher discovered that they can predict eclipses, that there was a whole series of eclipses that occurred during the time when these lines were made. So the Nazca Lines are following these nodal points with lines across the desert. So somebody can watch when they come in and see when the moon and the sun are on these different paths, and they had star constellations with the different objects. But the Nazca Lines could also be used and were used for predicting eclipses. It was just getting closer into the Dark Age, and they probably had to move a bit quicker, didn't have enough time to maybe make a monument of like Göbekli Tepe or Stonehenge. So they did the Nazca Lines. But, and the German mathematician Maria Reg saw them as an astronomical calculator. And then there was a later researcher, and you can see how in the sun they're using these lines across the sand to track the position of the moon and the sun. They weren't landing strips for aliens. Any alien, if you can fly between a planet, you're going to have the technology to find your friend.
Right. Hello? Sheldon, did we lose you? Hello? Hello? Okay, and we're back.
Okay, so the Nazca Lines again have the potential to predict lunar and solar eclipses, and there was a whole series of lunar and solar eclipses, kind of like the tetrads and triads we're having now, way back then. So there was a reason that whoever was teaching these people this information, and I think it had either a Shambhala component or an extraterrestrial group, higher beings. These weren't controlling beings from the Anunnaki. These were people who really cared about our spiritual evolution. And these sites, I just know it. So we've got the Nazca Lines in the Peru, and two competent researchers have concluded with what I'm saying right now. But then we have this one in Alberta, and it's called Omahk. And this one really interests me because interesting site. Right out in the middle of the prairie, we have this site. And guess what? It's on the exact same parallel as Stonehenge. So it's on the same latitude as Stonehenge. And its outside ring of this site is roughly the same size as Stonehenge. So So this is not using megalithic rock structures. This is a simpler site. And guess what, Alfred? You see these little spokes coming out?
Yeah.
Guess how many spokes are there? We're talking about lunar stuff. There's 28
Right.
spokes.
Wow.
It represents the lunar month, right?
Right.
And guess what? Now, the guy I've actually contacted, his name is Gordon Freeman. The guy's a genius. As soon as I started talking to this guy, I could tell he wasn't a typical archaeologist that went in there and all they were calling them medicine wheels, and they missed the whole point of this thing. He got onto this site, and he's a chemical. I think he's a professor in chemical engineering, and so he had that chemist mind that looks for patterns, right? Repeating patterns and stuff like that. And he started seeing that this is a 5,000 year calendar. And he said, when I asked him, I said, could it be a 5,125 year calendar? Because that's the month. And he said, plus or minus 200 years. So he was able to determine this thing was a calendar. He saw the 28 spokes, so he knew it was a lunar. When we talked a little bit about the spiritual potential, he wasn't really big into that because he's still a scientist.
Yeah.
So if somebody like me phones him and says, do you think some blue guys in Havana flew up and talked to Plains Indians? It gets into the crazy realm, right? Personally, I believe that probably is what happened. But, everybody watching this has to use their own discernment, and so he thinks they were just kind of nerds on the prairies, and they were running this 5,000 year calendar for fun, and they were monitoring, equinoxes and all that stuff. I think it's a little bit more than that. These simply the same latitude as Stonehenge, the outer ring the same size. It's got 28 rays to represent the lunar month. I think this site, I know this site could be used the exact same way as Stonehenge, Goblekli, Tepe, and all these other sites used the same way.
Right.
And you see how it's a little bit more rudimentary. I think as we got closer to the Dark Age, that these groups pretty much stopped coming here a couple thousand years ago. And so, the later sites weren't quite as fancy, I guess you could say. So there's a possible connection with North American cultures here, the Plains Indians. Again, an advanced race, contact the Tibetans, a loving group of people, contact the Plains Indians. They lived in harmony with the earth. Spiritually, they were a lot more ahead than any Westerner is right now. They may have lost their way with us through the Dark Age and stuff, but they kind of had their spiritual side a bit together. So I could see them going out to all these different groups and teaching them this stuff. And the Hopi prophecy also connects with this. They talk again about a white-skinned god, Pahana, that flies in on a machine and arrives. So Pahana, all these people could be the same people. There's quite a link with it. And they call him the white-skinned brother from the stars. So is he flying a Vimana? Is he one of these original Aryans flying a Vimana? I don't know. It's there's a connection there. Seems a lot of these people appear flying in the sky on a Vimana. So this is Canadian Stonehenge. He says the precise 5,000 year calendar. They were tracking the 28-day moon cycle, and it could easily be used to track these nodal eclipses, this Ra'u and Ketu, these nodal moon points, so that you could actually determine when an eclipse was coming. And if you look at this picture down below here, they could just go out and put big rocks when they're tracking these points, right? You got the whole band of the ecliptic here. You can track everything on this device. This is quite an amazing little device sitting out in the Alberta prairie, right?
Right.
This wasn't a small find. I think this guy's got something very significant. And I take my hat off to this man for figuring it out as much as he did, because any archaeologist, other archaeologists, wouldn't have figured this out. So he doesn't have to buy my Vimana theory and it was for enlightenment, but maybe in the future he will, because I think this is going to come into our view a lot more in the coming years. I really do. So, but it's not just this. They've got these rock outcrops. They found them in the Egyptian desert. They found them in Armenia. They found some of them in Europe. They're now finding wooden Stonehenges in Europe. And then they found Megahenge. I don't know if you heard of Megahenge. It's under the ground, but they used ground thumpers to look down. But there's a giant Stonehenge, not too far from where Stonehenge is right now, that's many times bigger. And they think it's older. So this goes back a long ways. And some of these things go back, like Goblekli Tepe is really, 12,000, 13,000 years ago. And then when this Nicholas Roerich and Helena Roerich were doing their trips to Tibet and Mongolia, they saw these circular rock outcrops in Tibet and Mongolia. And the Tibetans used to rub yak butter on them. And when they ask, what were they for? They go, we don't know. The ancients put them there. That's what they were told. All they do is rub yak butter on them because that's kind of an auspicious thing to do. So it's kind of like they were paying homage to these ancient races that put these sites there. And I pretty much know they're there for spiritual purposes.
Right.
So they're all over the world. They're everywhere. And we'll probably find more. Like this is the one in Armenia. You can see that it's very old. Like that's an old site. And it's the same thing. They can track these nodal points above and below the moon with these devices. They can also track Venus and everything else, but they can track this with these devices.
Yeah. Are they pretty much the same age, or are there different ages?
They don't really know, because they know Goblekli Tepe is like 12 or 13,000 years, so it's much older than probably these ones. And the ones in Mongolia and Tibet, they don't really know either. They don't really know the age of them, because you can go to, the Druids were at Stonehenge, and you could go there and excavate some Druid remains that might be 3,500 years old, but that site might have been there for 3,000 years before that.
Right.
So it's really hard to kind of carbon date and figure out the real age of these sites.
Right.
But we need to look at them with fresh eyes. More people got to come in and challenge what I'm saying. Go for it. Show me the mathematics. It doesn't work, because it does work. Yeah. And see what they're for. I know they're for. And then the one in Nabta Plata in Egypt, you can see it's got a heel stone just like Stonehenge. You can predict the nodal points of lunar and solar eclipses along the moon with this device. Yeah. Now, do you go as much into depth in this study in your book, Remember Zen? I know that we're looking at the basic thesis here. Are you going to write a second book on this? I don't know. I'm kind of a funny person that way, Alfred. I touched on all of this stuff so people could see it and they could understand it in the book. But I'm not going to spend my whole life trying to prove this. I don't really care if people believe it. I know in the future, maybe it won't be till we're in Tetra Yuga or maybe even the Golden Age. Yeah. Everybody's going to know this. Doesn't matter when they know it. It's just, I'm just saying it now because I know it. And I think other sentient beings will benefit from it. But this is research for people who really want to worry about this stuff. Yeah. To me, it doesn't really matter if you believe it or not. You're just bringing up the information. Yeah. And I know I'm looking here at a page from the electronic version of your book, which I recommend to everyone. And it's one of the best condensed teachings on this. It's just a magnificent book. Oh, did you read the part on this stuff too? Did you get through that part yet? No, I'm here. I said the Buddha nature just needs to take up its intended position at the top of the head, and one becomes enlightened. For most people, it lays semi-dormant in the lower chakras because we allow our minds to rule. Yep. Yeah, I remember writing that. Well, you have a very clear style, which is just kind of amazing. It has to be that way. When you teach the Great Way, there's too much esoteric information that people just can't wrap their heads around. Yeah. And that's where you see a lot of what I call fluff peddlers. There's a lot of people out there, they capture all these words and they say them, but they have no understanding of the deeper meaning.
Yeah.
It's time for humanity to really know this stuff. So
Yeah.
I tried to write it as simple
Yeah.
as I could.
I'm kind of going through your book a bit at a time because it takes me time to process it. I mean,
Yeah.
at a deep level.
I told you it's a hard book to kind of read. There's a lot of information in that book.
To internalize.
Yeah.
Well, back to Stonehenge, Africa. So this is
Yeah.
in
In Africa. So we have these devices all over the planet. Just imagine how many wooden ones might have been built in Europe that just kind of rotted away and we'll never know where they're at. And like the mega Stonehenge, they just found that by chance. So there could literally be hundreds of these devices buried in the sands of time, rotted away, whatever. They're out there though, and they were used for spiritual purposes. And I think a lot of this information came from a higher world. Some of these beings, and they know this stuff, and we're supposed to know this stuff, but we have to find it ourselves. Earth people we have to discover this ourselves. That's part of our evolution. That's part of where we're going, and there's like barriers between planets. I don't think the higher worlds just fly in with this kind of information and throw it on our laps. Otherwise, what's the point of having a spiritual evolution in the first place? You got to have that higher respect, and that's why I really have a problem with Nesra and all that stuff. That's not a higher world. Like, think about it. We're going to come now with lots of money and you're going to be rich. And no, this is spiritual stuff. The material world, that's just it's. But it's been fun watching it, and maybe we've all learned a little bit about the importance of discernment.
Yeah.
So these megalithic circular rock formations were for a purpose, and they were used by an advanced society of astronomers and priests. And I think they flew vimanas around, these intercontinental vimanas. I think that's how this information got all over the world. There was even giants in South America in the time of Nazca Lines. The natives said that there were giants there, like tall blonde people and all this other kind of stuff. So it went around the world. And they're giant astronomical calculators used for tracking celestial events for spiritual purposes. Number one thing, never remember this. If you learn anything today, timing and technique are equally as important. So always remember that. It's not just your technique, whether it be Kriya Yoga, Kundalini, Vajra, Vipassana, whatever technique you have. If you know the timing as well, it just takes decades and lifetimes off of you becoming fully awakened. And we all deserve to know this information. I hope I'm not giving it out too early. I don't think I am. I just, I'm doing it also because if what happened before happens again, there's a very good chance I'm not going to be here to tell anybody it. And so I wanted to get this on an interview on video. And I always knew you were the right guy. I was always going to do it with you. I just didn't know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So it's funny though that we have to kind of do it in this kind of environment, though, isn't it? Like this should be quite important information for any spiritual seeker. And the other reason I held back is when I was writing articles in sort of 2008, 2009, telling people that we got this all wrong. I got very negative. Can you imagine? Put yourself in 2009. I wrote a thing saying about this stuff and about the connection to Shambhala with the Tibetan Buddhism and all that. And I got all these horrible comments. And one guy even said that we're going to get enlightenment beds brought in by the Galactics. So you just lay down in this suntan bed and push one for moksha, enlightenment, and bang, you're enlightened with your Nesra funds. So there's no need to do spiritual practice anymore. I was hearing this stuff. And then some of the stuff I was writing, these peddlers, I call them fluff peddlers, these sort of spiritual people that just like to say the words that they don't really have a teaching. They were using my stuff. It was showing up. So it was great that it was having that effect, but it was being used, in my opinion, by kind of the wrong people. I'm giving this to real spiritual seekers or somebody who's just wakened up and they know their role is to help lift the consciousness of humanity. They can use this teaching. They're welcome to. They can have it's theirs. It's not mine. but it has to be done with respect, not for me, but respect for the teaching and how ancient it is and how important it is for the practitioner to get their foundation right, because there is a dark night of the soul, and so it has to have respect, and you have to be right before you take these final steps.
Right.
And you want to be around the right type of people when you take that step. So if somebody's really, I got hundreds of acres on my farm here, come and stay with me for a couple of weeks before an eclipse or something like that. But you got to be around the right people too, so that your attack or this negative influence that happens for a couple of days won't be around. It just won't affect you. So, in the monasteries of Tibet, you were full of monasteries with enlightened people. That was your sort of protection from, because the dark always tries to offthrow new sources of light. You know that?
Right.
This whole why there's this light and dark play is that these souls that don't make it into the golden age, they don't get cast into a fiery hell forever. That's a myth. That's the hell is one of the biggest lies. But you may incarnate in another third dimensional world and go through all the same experiences that we have just through the last dark age. And you don't want to do that. You shouldn't have to do that. Don't fall for that trap. Raise your consciousness up. Live in spirit again. So you don't have to do that, because that's what the dark want. They know that their time, they're not going to be around in the Tetra Yuga and Sattva Yuga. They know that. But as many souls that they can take with them to wherever this next place is where souls go, we create a hell-like existence on our planets that we live on. Like if you live through the last dark age, that was a hell-like existence on planet Earth. When in fact, when you look outside, we should see the Garden of Eden. This is a beautiful planet. Everything's just magnificent on this planet. It's our system that, our cultures, our monetary, that's what's making it ugly in our behaviors. It's everything here is here right now for the golden age. It's right there in front of our face. We just have to wake up to our true nature to live it and to breathe it. And that's what all of this was about. They've been teaching us this for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
It's time for a refresher. And I hope this refreshes a lot of people's memories. And then we found this Antikythera Mechanism. Have you ever heard of this thing? This is what blew me away. It's a 2,000-year-old device, and they found it in a Greek shipwreck, right? And it has this really complex set of gears in it. And then they found out some guy, this is the device they found. So they found this analog computer basically in a Greek shipwreck that's 2,000 years old. And look at the gearing. Some guy did the gearing ratios. Look at this gearing ratio, Alfred. Imagine how hard that would be. I think that this device even incorporates the precession of the equinox. I'm not certain. Somebody will figure that out someday. But to be able to do a device like this 2,000 years ago is mind-boggling, just to get the gearing ratio right and guess what? This thing can predict lunar and solar eclipses for infinity. So what was some guy in a Greek shipwreck carrying a device that's this complex 2,000 years ago? And it was purely, they knew the spiritual aspects of eclipses, and that's what this device is. And again, everybody's researching it, and over the top again, we missed its real intended purpose. And this could even be an Atlantean type technology. That thing could have been 4,000 years old already when they found it. You know what I mean? There's something there. There's another thing to look at. So how did this ancient astronomical knowledge spread around the world? That's the next question. And, we can go back as far as the Ramayana War, which was 5100 BC, 7,000 years ago. They flew vimanas. There was flying machines. I don't think this was Vedic science fiction either. I think this was real. So was this ancient Atlantean anti-gravity technology still in use in Tetra Yuga? And I say probably it was. these Vimanas. And remember I said there's 4 types, 2 were continental, 1 was intercontinental, and 1 was interplanetary. That's the one that kind of blew me away, and then the blue skin. And that's when I took my teachings into the exopolitic political arena. And that's why I'm doing this with you, because, you know, this is when we start talking about the spirit and these, this is all tied to exopolitics. I really believe that it is. And they described the fuel that was used. In the Ramayana War, Alfred, they actually had these super weapons that Brahmastra weapons, which could destroy an entire battlefield. And they even had bigger weapons than that. Astra, there's 3 other Astra type weapons that one could destroy an entire planet. So like, who has, you know, technology 7,000 years ago that can destroy an entire planet, and Vimanas that can fly interplanetary? There has to be a bigger connection here. And I think why it was back in this time is Rama was in Tetra Yuga. Things were still good then. We weren't in the dark age. So the higher races, the races that we really, the blue skin guys, the ones who brought these higher teachings purely for spiritual purposes, were here for that reason. They were helping us along spiritually.
Right.
And
so the Ramayana War was prior to the Kali Yuga.
Yeah, it was in Tetra Yuga. But it was 5,100 BC, and this is where I was talking about when we remember that diagram, because somebody was asking about how the Anunnaki played in all of this, and they kind of started showing up in 4,500 BC. A lot of those texts, Sumerian texts and stuff, go to about 4,500 BC, just shortly after the Ramayana War. And I think what was really happened is we came out of Satwa Yuga, the Golden Age. We went into Tetra Yuga, which was a really good time too. And we get down to the time of Rama, and all of a sudden we drop back into the 4th dimension. So the Anunnaki can come in again. And they came in right at that time and were telling people, we created you, you know, we're your lords, all that, those Greek lord gods and mythology. That was all the Anunnaki playing with us. I think they even messed with some of the Christian saints, you know, where they tell us, you know, Abraham was told to kill his son. I don't think an angel or God would do that. That's kind of Anunnaki. See how, you know, like, I think they messed with the chosen ones too. I don't think they had any respect for the spiritual evolution. They were kind of kind of like what we would probably act like if we discovered another planet that had lots of animals that tasted really good to eat and was streams full of gold. You know, we would go there and act like kind of like pigs as well. You know, we wouldn't respect like we should respect. And I think that's kind of what the Anunnaki were.
Right.
And I love to troll them. I think that when we were, you see those pictures of where some small guys serving the big guy, I think that we were probably more creative. We were probably more, everything that they wanted, we ended up having kind of from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah. Well, as I understand it, they're a reptilian race and we're a mammalian race. And so there's a natural competition. Yeah.
And so, you know, and they couldn't come back in. They're not around in the golden age. I think the next golden age, archons, all of this stuff. So becoming enlightenment, then there's no issues. We're still in a zone where you got to be careful. So take these teachings carefully, be around the right people when you do the final practice, and learn how to shut your mind off more naturally, which is living in nature. And a lot of people will become enlightened. Like it's going to happen. I know it. It's going to happen. And so these ancient flying machines, that's how this technology, when they built Stonehenge and Goblekli Tepe, I think that these early Atlantean people flew, or maybe the inner earth people flew around and taught us. They helped build these sites and helped teach us. And it's all spiritual. They didn't leave us blueprints. Well, we do have blueprints for Vimanas, but they didn't leave us all the free energy technology, because we have to find that out. We have to find free energy, and just like we have to find enlightenment again. We had to find this again. This had to be found by somebody down here on Earth, because it's our evolution. We have to do it. And higher worlds just don't get involved like you see sort of in the modern exopolitical environment. There's way too much stuff out there. And so Vimanas were still used during the time of Krishna too. So the Mahabharata is an epic that describes these flying machines and super weapons. They were still used in 3100 BC, which was the time of Kalachakra War. So I think, and you know, this is when Krishna told everybody to get out of Dwarka. And then now they found Dwarka. They found it off the coast of India. They actually found this place. So a lot of this stuff is really catching up with us, that this stuff really did occur. This is not pie in the sky science fiction, that this stuff actually occurred. And in the Mahabharata, it talks about elephants burning up, men burning from inside their armor from these Brahmastra weapons. They found radiation in the desert between Pakistan and India. You know, some nukes might have even went off in the Kalachakra War. It was an epic battle between these forces of light and darkness. And I think Krishna was fighting Anunnaki. So somebody asked, what was Krishna's? He was opposite of the Anunnaki. He wanted the world to be enlightened and to live in spirit. The Anunnaki didn't want that for us. That was totally two different people, two different groups. And
the Anunnaki. Well, I mean, not to the. It's from an exopolitical standpoint. And we just released a program yesterday on News Inside Out. The Anunnaki and the the reptilians and Orion Grace through the Greada treaties actually took over the United States. And so it was the US that dropped the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. So you have a repetition of that cycle. If it was the Anunnaki who were behind the nuclear weapons in this war, well, yeah. It was the same reptilians and Anunnaki who returned because they were behind the American dropping of the nuclear weapons in the Second World War.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's
yeah. They're very much behind that, and I think one of the reasons is, and we won't get into this debate again, but that soul that within us, that God spark of light, I don't think they like that, and they might know the only way to kind of fragment it so it doesn't, it's gone, is a nuclear is nuclear.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. And so you're right, and so we're dealing with. I once read in a book that Second World War, and this again deals with this, that the Second World War was, quote, fought at the level of the soul.
Yeah.
End of quote. And that tends, and I remember getting shivers when I read that. And so that tends to go to that same argument.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think at some point we'll learn probably a little bit more, because as we're going into Dwarpa Yuga now, every day gets better. We're on the upstream arc now. Every day is going to get better. I think at some point, and this is the part the exopolitical community probably misled people a bit too, is all of a sudden first contact became the number one priority, and everybody, we got to have this first contact. We got to have disclosure. We got to have this. It's going to happen at some point. The higher worlds will contact us again, but it's kind of like that Avatar Avtut thing I gave you. We got to keep lifting ourselves up a bit more, because, you know, we're still slaughtering animals on a massive scale. People are starving down here. We have a lot to do. We have a lot to fix yet. And I hope the women really, you know, put up a good show and help change this world, because I really believe the divine feminine is the real catalyst for change. We all got to become enlightened, and we got to have a better teaching to do that. But we got to change this masculine, this negative energy, which was very much a reptilian type thing, into a more kind and caring and higher consciousness space. And then we'll probably meet. They'll come and meet us, you know. And it's an interesting thing. And one of the Buddhist prophecies, I don't know if it's Tibetan one or which one it is, but they say when this Maitreya presents himself to the world, when he appears, that there will be spaceships that reach 100,000 yogins. Now, a yogin, I don't really know the exact distance. I think it's a distance. It's either between the distance between the sun and the moon, or the earth and the moon, or the earth and the sun. But there's supposed to be 100,000 yogins. So maybe our first contact really does happen when the final Buddha appears, and that's when they come, because then we're on our way, right? It still might not happen for 100 years, 400 years.
Yeah,
it could happen tomorrow. We don't know that, but so we shouldn't worry so much about this first contact or disclosure. The real number one thing on this planet we should be concerned about is, let's become spiritual again. Let's have enlightened societies again. And what I said, premature golden age. Let's do it. Let's get it going, because we have that capability. We really do. We can do that. So this final descent into the Kali Yuga is really where the giants disappeared from the earth. We're right at the bottom. It fits with, when you look at when the Roman Empire, all these Chinese wars, everything fits that model I showed you earlier, where we fell to our lowest. And that's when consciousness falls to its lowest. And remember, it's not your mind consciousness, it's your soul consciousness. And it really is affected by those magnetics. But that's just, it's kind of like astrology. You know, you can be born as a Scorpio or as a Libran and have those subtle influences from the multiverse on your soul that makes you have certain attributes. They're very subtle though. And it's the same thing with these dual stars, is it's fairly subtle. It's over a 24,000 year period that these cycles happen.
Yeah.
So the changes are very subtle, but they're never the same. And our soul is affected by magnetic and electrics. And that's why learning about this goofy key that I made here is very important, because this is your key to ascension. This is the golden key to ascension, I think.
Right.
You might not believe it, but I think your grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren might. Because I think a lot of this is about the next generation too. We baby boomers and the Generation X people, we think it's all me. I think that the next generation coming in is going to be just absolutely fantastic. And we have to make sure that we change our ways so that they can have a good world and have an enlightened world. And we're part of that. We're the root of the next race and root race.
Right.
And we got to get it right. We got to be better. We all can be better. We can be spiritualized. Enlightenment's not going to take you 20, 40 years living in a cave if you understand what's been taught here today. So, we're out of this dark age. As we fell in, all these fear-based beliefs, religion got in the way. We had all these great spiritual teachers come to us, and religion we got all this dogma and this religious junk around it now. And we got to break free from that and kind of raise our consciousness and truly become spiritual beings again.
Yeah.
So we always hear about these, how are we going to defeat these dark forces and these archonic influences? And, the Gnostics warned us about the archons. You introduced me to a really great guy who's writing about it, John Muntz. Is it Muntz? He's writing about the Gnostics.
Right.
I didn't realize, he sent me some really cool stuff. I didn't realize how much the Gnostics warned us about it. I know King David did, where he says, as I walk in the death prayer, where he goes, as I walk through the valley of death, I'll fear. They're telling you how to go through the lower bardo, because that's where the archonic influences can reside. They can kind of sit in the lower fourth dimension and play with us. It's for a short time.
Yeah.
They can't destroy your spirit, but they can kind of mess with it and create.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And when Salme Monastery was built by Padmasambhava, he had to subdue them. And it was really him and Solomon that are only ones that were able to subdue the archons. But there's some really important things for people to understand about negative forces is fearlessness. Your fear comes from your mind and the body wanting to preserve itself, but your spirit, your Buddha nature, your soul, your what did you call it? The multidimensional God fragment. I like that the best. It's very powerful. It's brave. It's the bravery, courage comes from the spirit. Live in spirit, and this stuff you won't have nightmares anymore. You won't have any negative influences in your life. Just be fearless.
Right.
And it's a hard thing to really, you can say that to somebody, but just really, really be fearless. But there's other things the archons don't like and negative spirits don't like. They hate prana. So fresh flowers are just full of prana. Have fresh flowers in your house. Have lots of flower garden outside. They don't like that. Always have flowers. If you feel you're under negative influence, start putting flowers in your bedroom and stuff. They hate prana. It makes them ill. Anything in nature and freshness. I think that's why some of these planets are wiped with these awful weapons to get them to kind of like Mars-like state where there's no prana anymore, because then you really lose your connection to your planet, because prana feeds the spirit, right? So these are kind of awful little parasites running around in our multiverse, but I think we drew them in the Dark Age too. Yeah. And their time is short. They're not going to be here in the Golden Age. No matter what tricks they try, what they try to do, they're not going to be here. And I think at the soul level, if they got one, they know that.
Right.
So be fearless. That's why you see in monasteries they have lots of incense. You ever notice when you go to, they burn incense all the time?
Yeah. What's the thing with incense? Dark
energies don't like nice smells. It's like prana, like flowers again.
I see.
It's pure. It's like a protectionism. It's to keep dark influences away from that monastery. They won't come in there when there's flowers everywhere and nice smelling incense. So incense help. You got to be careful with incense now, because some of them have leads in them and stuff. So make sure you get a good supply of incense. This is a hard one, but gain control of your dreams again. When in the dream state, sometimes when you wake up and you're really tired and you've had nightmares and stuff, that's your soul and that etheric body leaving your physical body, going out on a trip in your dream state. They can mess with you in that trip. But if you know how to control your dreams, when you see anything like that, you can stop it, you can change it. It's kind of like lucid dreaming. The more people get closer to lucid dreaming, the closer you are to becoming enlightened, because you're getting in control of your conscious and your subconscious, and they have, again, less effect on you because you're now in control of your dream state. So be brave in your dreams. If you have repeating ones, maybe learn how to change them while something bad happens. You can gain control of your dream states. So don't let them mess with you in the dream state. The most important thing, abandon all negative emotions. So when you have jealousy, hate, fear, that's what they love. They love this. And that's why I think there's been so much disinformation, and why every day you see another picture of Nibiru coming in at Perry. I've seen Nibiru pictures at perihelion around the sun for 15 years now. It doesn't stay around that long. It comes in and out. It's probably a year. And we got, this perihelion thing, and it's a great fear. Puts everybody at ease. How many websites have you been to? I'm driving inland. I've got secret information. All of that's because the Earth's going to end tomorrow. All that stuff is archonic stuff. It's to make people feel off center, fearful, and we don't need to do that. Like, I actually feel very sorry for the people who are propagating this information, because to hold a spiritual being back at a time like this is about the worst thing you can do at your soul level. These people who are doing this, and even the false teachers out there that are just repeating stuff like I'm teaching you right now. You watch, Alfred, how much this moves into the consciousness of the New Age movement, and it gets twisted. But
right,
you don't want to be doing that at this time. That's I'm not going to warn anybody. But
I understand. Now, did we skip over, or did I miss it, the point that know how to cross the bardo in death? Did we
I
skip
skipped it, and that's probably the most important one.
Yeah, I was
okay.
waiting for that one.
Yeah, so that's a hard one again, but and that's why if somebody's watching this, like dropping names and dropping books, because I want people to be able to go out and research this stuff and go, holy, this guy was telling this right. You know,
Yeah.
the Tibetan Book of the Living and the Dead is probably the best instruction on how to pass through the bardo at death. Now, if you die, a lot of people don't even know they're dead at first, and they kind of linger around the body. That's why after people die in a hospital, they see themselves looking down. They still, their soul is still kind of clinging to the body. And what a ghost is, if somebody really loved somebody and they died and they didn't cross over properly, that spirit kind of just lingers in a place for too long and doesn't get reborn again or go on in its journey. Those kind of things are happening on Earth right now. So, and what the teaching of going through the bardo is kind of like what King David said, as I walk through the valley of death, as I cross over and go through that lower astral, I'll fear no evil. So anything pops up on either side of me, I'm not going to give rise to fear, because I know it's just archonic fluff. It's part
right.
of they're trying to make you fearful. They're trying to get energy off that orb, that Buddha nature inside, that's like a billion suns. It's very powerful. It's multidimensional, and that's what these lower fourth dimensional parasites are feeding off of, because it's, you know, it's a very, very powerful source of food for them. And if they can get you into fear in death or in life, you know, that's why we have all these wars through the Dark Age. That was all them creating all this loose and fear and everything else. And so you got to learn how to cross through that death plane without fear. It's all about fearlessness, you know, and the soul is not a coward. There's no place for enlightenment in a coward either. You have to be fearless. And it's kind of hard to be when you start reading all this stuff, but be fearless. You don't have to fear this stuff. Your light within you, your God spark, is eternal and it's powerful. It doesn't have to fall for tricks anymore. It doesn't have to fall for this stuff anymore. We're all bigger than this. We really are. And I think we're going to get it right. I know a lot of people in the external world, you know, they're pushing the old buttons. Let's get a war going. They're because, you know, they've overprinted money and they've bankrupted all the nations. They got to have a war just to hide that, right? And so that's why you're still seeing this residual stuff in our lives, but it's going to go away really quick, really, really quick. I really think if you and I do an interview in 5 years from now, we're just going to be like, oh my God, what's happened? And some of it will be negative, but it's happening now. We're in the zone.
Right.
And they say in prophecy, teachings will be brought forward to help people through this time. And that's what's happening right now. This is a teaching to help others through this, to help people awaken to their own Buddha nature. That's, you know, that's what it's about. You know, I want to see a world. I'm talking about not hundreds of thousands of enlightened people. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of enlightened people on this planet. That's kind of, I always shoot a little high maybe, but I think that we can go there. I think we can get there. I really do.
Right.
So these archons,